Hello again, Planeswalkers, and welcome to another episode of Bane Alley Magic. I am your host, Eric, and today we're going to be talking about a new commander. A commander so new, it hasn't even been printed yet. That's right, today we're talking about a spoiler from the Ravnica Allegiance, the Haunt of Hightower. But before we do, I'd just like to remind you to please hit that like button or maybe even that subscribe button. I would really appreciate it. So, the Haunt is a 3/3 legendary flying lifelink vampire who says whenever the Haunt of Hightower attacks, defending player discards a card. And whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on the Haunt of Hightower. It drains vitality from those it touches. So, when you look at the Haunt, you think either mill or discard, right? Mill works great, but without blue, it won't work as the main theme of the deck. So, most people are going to build this deck around discard. In other words, hand hate. That is where I would say you are making a mistake. I've played lots of Commander, and I know there are 101 reasons for the whole table to gang up on you. Hand destruction is right up there with land destruction. Just the fact that your opponents suspect you are playing a discard deck can have you at a disadvantage before the game begins. No one is going to feel bad about attacking you. They'll just say, "You're playing a discard deck, so stop crying, meh." Don't get me wrong. Discard is a powerful strategy, and if you are an experienced player, maybe you can fend off 3 opponents at once with this commander, but being that this is a mono-colored deck, that is very difficult to do. So, for that reason, I have chosen to utilize the Haunt of Hightower's secret strategy. The strategy that will occur to you after all others, as it did for me. Have you got it yet? No? Well, let me give you a clue. The Haunt says, whenever the Haunt attacks, defending player discards a card, and whenever a card is put into opponent's graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on the Haunt of Hightower from anywhere. So, where is anywhere? Well, we have the hand, there's the library, oh yes, and finally, the battlefield. And what better way to put creatures from the battlefield into the graveyard than with a mono black deck? So, much like Toshiro Umezawa, our deck is based around removal spells and cards that synergize with death. That's right. So, let's start with the creatures. We have Gatekeeper of Malakir, 2 black for a vampire warrior who's a 2/2 with kicker 1 black. You can play an additional black as you cast this spell. When Gatekeeper of Malakir enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, target player sacrifices a creature. We have Plague Crafter, which is a 3/2 human shaman. When Plague Crafter enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Each player who can't discards a card. Next we have Ob Nixilis, Unshackled, 4 generic and 2 black for a 4/4 legendary demon with flying and trample. Whenever an opponent searches his or her library, that player sacrifices a creature and loses 10 life. Whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Ob Nixilis. So this goes great with our strategy. It's making people sacrifice creatures. It's getting bigger, just like the Haunt of Hightower is going to be getting bigger. And man, this even triggers when they crack their Evolving Wilds, Great card. Next we have Shieldred Whispering One, 5 generic and 2 black for a 6/6 Praetor with Swamp Walk. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifices a creature. Yeah, sweet. Next we have Shriekmaw, 4 generic and a black for a 3/2 elemental with Fear. This creature can't be blocked except by artifact creatures and or black creatures. When Shriekmaw enters the battlefield, destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature. And it also has Evoke 1, so you may evoke for 2, 1 generic and a black. You may cast this spell for its evoke cost. If you do, it's sacrificed when it enters the battlefield. So You can just pay 2 mana to essentially to essentially just destroy a non-artifact, non-black creature if you don't need to have the body on the battlefield, which is really sweet. And we have Butcher of Malakir, 5 generic and 2 black for a 5/4 flying vampire warrior. And it says, whenever Butcher of Malakir or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. So here we got 6 creatures that are going to be making your opponents sacrifice creatures. Shriek Maw is a little bit of targeted removal there. And next we have some more targeted removal, such as Ravenous Chupacabra, 2 generic and 2 black for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls. And it's a beast. Nasty one too. Next we have Dark Hatchling, 4 generic and 2 black for a 3/3 flying horror. And when Dark Hatchling enters the battlefield, destroy target non-black creature. It can't be regenerated. Next we have a couple of board wipers. We have Dread Cacodemon, 7 and 3 black for an 8/8 demon, and when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, destroy all creatures your opponents control, then tap all other creatures you control. So what's great about this is you can cast this on your second main phase, and you don't care about tapping down your own creatures. It's not like they don't untap. Next we have Reaver Demon, 4 generic and 4 black for a 6/6 flying demon. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, destroy all non-artifact, non-black creatures. They can't be regenerated. So another board wipe on a stick there. And having a 6/6 flying demon left over afterwards is not a bad deal. And again, we're playing black, so all of our creatures are going to survive. Next we have Overseer of the Damned, 5 generic and 2 black for a 5/5 flying demon. When it enters the battlefield, you destroy any target creature, anything you want. And whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, you get a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token. Sweet. Next we have Noxious Gearhulk, 4 generic and 2 black for a 5/4 menace construct. And when Noxious Gearhulk enters the battlefield, you may destroy any target creature. If a creature is destroyed this way, you gain life equal to its toughness. So gaining life is important for this deck because, as with many black decks, we're going to be paying life to draw cards, to do interesting things. And also, if you look at Overseer of the Damned, this is a card that synergizes with death, right? It cares about creatures dying, and we have lots of other things in the deck that care about creatures dying as well. Next we have even more targeted removal. Guiltleaf Winnower is 3 generic and 2 black for a 4/3 menace elf warrior. And when Guiltleaf Winnower enters the battlefield, you may destroy target non-elf creature whose power and toughness aren't equal. Next we have Tetzamok Primal Death, 4 generic and 2 black for a legendary Elder Dinosaur who's a 6/6 with Death Touch. And I know everyone says that being Death Touch on a 6/6 is superfluous, but you never know when you're going to have to block that 20/20 consuming aberration, right? So anyway, Tetzamok says you can pay a black and reveal it from your hand, and then you put a prey counter on a target creature. You activate this ability only during your turn, and when Tetzamok enters the battlefield, you destroy each creature your opponents control with a prey counter on it. Usually, I'm going to be thankful if I hit, 2 or 3 creatures with this, honestly. I mean, I use it for 1 creature lots of the time, and I'm happy with it. But if you can get more, that's great too. I mean, obviously this has the potential of hitting, up to 10 creatures and destroying them all. And that's great. That's going to be putting all those +1/+1 counters on Haunt of the Hightower, and, maybe he's even going to, be getting in for some commander damage. Who knows? Kalidas, Bloodchief of Get, is 5 generic and 2 black for a 5/5 legendary vampire warrior. And it says you can pay 3 black and tap it to destroy target creature. If that creature is put into a graveyard this way, you put a black vampire creature token onto the battlefield, and its power and toughness is... Its power is equal to that creature's power, and its toughness is equal to that creature's toughness. So, pretty sweet. Again, more removal on a stick, and we get our own bodies on the battlefield. We like that. Some of you might be thinking we should put in the other Kalidas in the deck, but when you think about the other Kalidas, it says instead of creatures dying, creatures are going to be getting exiled, and that's a replacement effect, which means the creatures never die, they never hit the graveyard, so we don't want that in our deck, because that's actually going to turn off a lot of our pieces, so we don't want the other Kalidas in this deck. Next we have Dread, 3 generic and 3 black for a 6/6 with Fear, And whenever a creature deals damage to you, destroy it. Yeah, and you're going to be getting hated on, probably, at some point in the game. So it's good to have this out to deter people from attacking you. And when Dread is put into a graveyard from anywhere, you shuffle it back into its owner's library. Pretty nice. Next we have Ascendant Evankar, 4 generic and 2 black for a 3/3 legendary vampire who also has flying. And it says other black creatures you control get +1/+1, and non-black creatures you control get -1/-1. So this is going to be killing tons of tokens. If anyone's playing tokens, absolutely. And just how many creatures out there are people running with toughness 1? You'll be seeing me running those creatures less and less. I've been losing faith in 1-drop creatures quite a bit. You see, we got a lot of converted mana costs going on here. Lots of high converted mana costs. And for that reason, lots of my lower cast spells are the ramp spells. You find out in Commander, we're really a late game format. And more and more, it's not like I get rid of my low converted mana cost spells, but usually when it's creatures, I don't have much faith in low converted mana cost creatures in Commander. They just die and they don't do much. Better to have the artifacts that do the same thing. Next we have Harvester of Souls, 4 generic and 2 black for a 5/5 demon with Death Touch. Whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. So even creatures your opponents control, creatures you control, whenever any non-token creature dies, you get to draw a card. Pretty sweet. Next we have Sepulchral Primordial, 5 and 2 black for a 5/4 avatar with Intimidate. When Sepulchral Primordial enters the battlefield, for each opponent, you may put up to 1 target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Yeah, so these are creatures that care about death. These are creatures that synergize with death. So Kothopede, Soul Harvester, is 4 generic and 2 black for a 6/6 flying demon. And whenever a permanent owned by another player is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Sweet. Next we have Blood Crazed Paladin, 1 and a black for a 1/1 Vampire Knight with Flash, and when it enters the battlefield, it gets a +1/+1 counter for each creature that died this turn. So you play this right after a board wipe, and you got a huge Blood Crazed Paladin. Pretty sweet. Okay, next we have some more utility creatures. We have Yeheni Undying Partisan, 2 generic and a black for a 2/2 legendary vampire with haste. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on Yeheni Undying Partisan, and you can sacrifice another creature to give Yeheni haste, to give him indestructible. Excuse me. So great sacrifice outlet in any black commander deck, just like Viscera Seer, which is 1 black for a 1/1 vampire wizard, and you sacrifice a creature to scry 1. Pretty sweet. And my last sacrifice outlet creature is Sadistic Hypnotist, 3 generic and 2 black for a 2/2 human minion, and it says sacrifice a creature and target player discards 2 cards. Activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. I also really like putting this in decks where I gain control of my opponent's creatures, with red spells that gain control of their creatures really cheap till the end of the turn, and then you just sacrifice those creatures to make them discard more creatures. Pretty great. Alright, next we have Nirkana Revenant, 4 generic and 2 black for a 4/4 vampire shade who's naked, and whenever you tap a swamp for mana, you add an additional black. And you can pay 1 black, and Nirkana Revenant gets +1/+1 till the end of the turn. Sweet. Next we have Crypt Ghast, our next ramping creature. 3 generic and a black for a 2/2 spirit with Extort. When you cast a spell, you may pay white or a black. If you do, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain that much life. And whenever you tap a swamp for mana, you get to add a black mana to your mana pool. So in addition to the mana that land produced. So both Nirkana Revenant and Crypt Ghast are essentially doubling all of our swamps, which is phenomenal. They're some of the best ramp creatures in the game, but, they die really easily too. So most of our ramp is in, artifacts and enchantments. Next we have Grey Merchant of Asphodel, 3 generic and 2 black for a 2/4 zombie. When Grey Merchant of Asphodel enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black. and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. So each black mana symbol in the mana costs of permanents you control counts towards your devotion to black. So when he enters the battlefield, if he's the only one entering if he's the only thing on the battlefield, he's going to give you 2 devotion all by himself. And that's going to drain each of your other 3 opponents of 2 life, and in that situation you're going to gain 6 life, for example. Great way to gain life. Great addition to any mono black deck. This card even has a nickname, which is Gary. In the Magic universe, never underestimate any card with a nickname. Continuing, we have Kokusho, the Evening Star, 4 generic and 2 black for a 5/5 flying dragon spirit, who's also going to gain us some life. When Kokusho dies, each opponent loses 5 life, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. So this card doesn't, entirely synergize with the deck in any particular way. It's just a great life gain spell for black, and we need life gain in this deck to do certain things. You'll see some of them soon. Next we have Twilight Prophet, a fabulous draw card spell, 2 generic and 2 black for a 2/4 flying vampire cleric with Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have the City's Blessing, you reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand. Each opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is that card's converted mana cost. Yeah, a pretty sweet addition to any black deck. Just like Erebos, God of the Dead, 3 generic and a black for a 5/7 indestructible legendary enchantment creature god. And as long as your devotion to black is less than 5, Erebos isn't a creature. Your opponents can't gain life, and most importantly, you can pay 1 and a black and pay 2 life and draw a card, which is what we're going to be doing with this a lot of the time. Thankfully, since we're playing mono black, the odds are we probably will get Erebos activated. In other decks, he doesn't become a creature very often. Next, we have Balustrade Spy, 3 generic and a black for a 2/3 flying vampire rogue, who is one of our few mill pieces in the deck, but when you look at this ability, it synergizes fabulously with the Haunt of Hightower. So when this enters the battlefield, target player reveals cards from the top of his or her library until he or she reveals a land card, then puts those cards into his or her graveyard. So sometimes this is going to whiff, and it's just going to hit a land right away. Sometimes they mill like 10 cards before they hit a land. I mean, I've seen these cards get really crazy before. Next we have Demon Lord Bells and Lock, 4 generic and 2 black for a 6/6 Elder Demon who has flying and trample, and when Demon Lord Bells and Lock enters the battlefield, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card, then put that card into your hand. If that card's converted mana cost is 4 or greater, you repeat this process, and Bells and Lock deals 1 damage to you for each card put into your hand this way. So, real quickly, back to the Balustrade Spy. I forgot to mention with the Haunt of the Hightower, it doesn't say whenever 1 or more cards are put into an opponent's graveyard. It just says whenever a card. So when you mill your opponent with cards like Balustrade Spy, like say you milled your opponent for 10 cards, the Haunt of Hightower is going to get 10 +1/+1 counters. Pretty phenomenal, actually. Continuing with creature removal. Yes, we have lots of removal in this deck. We like removal. It's great. So we have Decree of Pain, 6 generic and 2 black. So if you hardcast this spell for 8, you destroy all creatures and they can't be regenerated, and you draw a card for each creature destroyed this way. Very important there. And you can cycle this for 5 mana, so if you cycle it, you pay the cycling cost, and you discard the card from your hand, and then you draw a card. And when you cycle Degree of Pain, all creatures get -2/-2 till the end of the turn. So even if you don't have 8, you can at least pay 5 and kill most of the creatures out there. Next we have one of the most powerful removal spells in the whole game, in Garrick's Wake. 7 generic and 2 black for a sorcery. Destroy all creatures you don't control and all planeswalkers you don't control. Yeah. I mean, 9 mana is a lot, but being able to destroy everything that isn't yours is value. Yeah, pretty sweet. Next we have a card that very often ends games all by itself. Torment of Hailfire. X and 2 black for a sorcery, and it says repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. So let's say for example you paid 8 mana into this. Let's say so you played 2 black and 6 into X. So you played 8 mana total, and so X is 6. So 6 times your opponents have to either pay 3 life, sack a non-land permanent, or discard a card. You often have to explain this card to them many times before they, finally understand all of their options. It's just a lot of words to wrap your head around. I mean, it's not even that many words, but for some reason, just do yourself a favor when you cast this spell. Hand it to every single player, because when you read it, they are not listening completely the first time. Next, we have Oblivion Stone, 3 generic for an artifact. And it says you can pay 4 mana and tap it and put a fate counter on target permanent, or you can pay 5 and tap it and sacrifice Oblivion Stone to destroy each non-land permanent without a fate counter on it, then remove all fate counters from all permanents. So why are we running this? Because we're mono black, and mono black has a very difficult time removing enchantments. Actually, it has an impossible time removing enchantments and artifacts. Because of black's inability to destroy enchantments or artifacts, we need to run some colorless spells to take care of those pesky enchantments that can really ruin our day. So we got Oblivion Stone, and as you'll see in our single targeted removal, we also have another artifact. But before we get to that, let's talk about Curtain's Call, which is 5 generic and a black for an instant, which has Undaunted. Interesting ability. The spell costs 1 less to cast for each opponent. So in a game of Commander, this is going to cost 3 less to cast. So that's going to be only 3 mana to destroy 2 target creatures. 3 mana. 3! Destroy 2 target creatures. Yeah, this is in an instant speed too. I mean, it's one of the best removal spells in black. Absolutely. Alright, back to that artifact we were talking about, Argentum Armor. It's 6 to cast, and it's 6 to equip, so quite a bit to invest. But equipped creature gets +6/+6, and whenever equipped creature attacks, destroy target permanent. Any target permanent. Land, enchantment, planeswalker, what have you. You can destroy it, and that's what we need. We need enchantment removal and artifact removal, because we're mono black. Next we have Vraska's Contempt. 2 generic and 2 black for an instant. Exile target creature or planeswalker, and you gain 2 life. Sweet. So, next we have some more reanimation going on. We're destroying all these creatures, so let's get them onto the battlefield under our control. So we have Whip of Erebos for our own creatures, 2 generic and 2 black, and for a legendary enchantment artifact. Creatures you control have lifelink, and you can pay 2 and 2 black and tap it. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Exile it at the next end step. If it would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. So, once per turn we can get one of our creatures back. Mostly I have this in the deck for the lifelink effect. Next we have Reanimate, 1 black for a sorcery. You put any creature card from any graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. Thankfully, since Haunt of the Hightower has lifelink and we're gaining lots of life with other spells, we don't mind losing life. Next we have probably the most powerful reanimation spell in the whole game ever. Rise of the Dark Realms. 7 and 2 black, so yeah, 9 mana. But you put all creature cards from all graveyards on the battlefield under your control. Yeah, what more could you ask for? You pretty much are about to win the game. Excuse me. Next we have some tutors. Demonic Tutor, 1 and a black. Search your library for any card, put that card into your hand, and then shuffle your library. Yeah, what more could you ask for? Next we have Increasing Ambition. Little expensive, 4 generic and a black. Same thing, you search your library for any card and you get to put it into your hand and then shuffle your library. But it also has flashback for 7 and a black, so for 8 you can play it from your graveyard and then exile it. So if you cast it from your graveyard, you get to search for 2 cards instead. and then shuffle your library. So in total, this can tutor you 3 cards, which is just what we need often. We need to utilize some of Black's most powerful effects. If you're playing Black and you're not playing with tutors, you need to get some now, because just remember, in whatever colors you're using, use those colors, use those powerful effects. If you're playing blue and you're not playing counter spells, what are you doing, man? Come on. Alright, and next we have Sudden Spoiling. 1 and 2 black for an instant, which has split second. As long as this spell is on the stack, players can't cast spells or activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. So basically no one can respond, no one can counter this. And it says, until end of turn, creatures target player controls lose all abilities and have base power and toughness of 0-2. So, unless they're getting an ability from an enchantment or an artifact, they lose all of their abilities. Anything that they had going on, flying, whatever, they just become 0-2s. And mostly this is in the deck for a fog effect. It's a really nice black fog to just prevent all combat damage that your opponents would control, but then also you get to block those creatures and kill them really easily. So it also lets Haunt of the Hightower go off as well. I was going to put the other black fog in the deck, which is called Darkness, but I figured this one is actually a lot better just to be able to kill some creatures as well. So put Sudden Spoiling in pretty much every black deck is what I'm going to do. I just discovered it the other day. Someone used it on me. Oh my gosh, it was terrible. I was playing with my Kaalia of the Vast deck, and I used Kaalia of the Vast to bring out like Rakdos, and I had like Lord of the Void, and I had all these demons, and they all got turned into 0-2s, which all were blocked. And he was like, remember this, guys, remember this, I'm saving all of you. And I was, yeah, I'll remember it. And I actually still won that game. That's funny, yeah. I Armageddon and won that game. Okay, continuing, we have some more cards that care about death. These are all cards that, synergize with the fact that we're killing all the opponent's creatures. So Mimic Vat is 3 generic for an artifact, and it has imprint. Whenever a non-token creature dies, you may exile that card. If you do, return each other card exiled with Mimic Vat to its owner's graveyard. And you can pay 3 and tap Mimic Vat to create a token that's a copy of a card exiled with Mimic Vat. It gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So with Mimic Vat, you just get to keep making little copies of whatever your best creature, your opponent's best creature is that you killed. You get to keep making copies of it and using it, and it gains haste. Excuse me, my dog is bothering me right now. All right, sorry. So continuing. Next we have Crypt Incursion, 2 generic and a black for an instant. Exile all creature cards from target player's graveyard, and you gain 3 life for each card exiled this way. Yeah, sweet. Especially since, people might be ganging up on us at any time. This is Commander, so having some life gain. Alright, here we got Grave Betrayal. 5 generic and 2 black for an enchantment that says whenever a creature you don't control dies, return it to the battlefield under your control with an additional +1/+1 counter on it at the beginning of the next end step. That creature is a black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. Yeah, this card gets busted really quick, especially in a deck like this. I had Grave Betrayal out where someone had another Grave Betrayal, and then someone else had like a mirror that became a copy of Grave Betrayal, and then things got really dumb. Whenever a creature died, we had to check the stack and see whose turn it was, and check priority of whatever things went on the stack, and whatever person's Grave Betrayal trigger went on the stack last resolved first, and they got the trigger. But as long as that doesn't happen, this card is going to get you tons of creatures that are dying. Next we got Black Market. 3 generic and 2 black for an enchantment. Whenever a creature dies, put a charge counter on Black Market. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you add black mana to your mana pool for each charge counter on Black Market. Yeah, this I've seen get like 20 charge counters in a game. If you can get this out early, man, you are going to be ramping so hard with Black Market. This thing gets charge counters just like nothing, like no problem. Next thing you know, Black Market has a few charge counters on it, and you are casting tons of spells. It's great. Next we have Revel in Riches, which is another enchantment that says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you create a colorless treasure artifact token with you can tap it and sacrifice this artifact to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 10 or more treasures, you just win the game. Sweet. Alright, next we have some equipment that we're going to be equipping onto the Haunt. We have the Swiftfoot Boots, 2 generic for an equipment that gives them Hexproof and Haste. It's equip 1. We want to give them Lightning Greaves, which is an equipment for 2, and it has equip 0. Equip creature has Haste and Shroud. And the last equipment here, we got Trepanation Blade, 3 generic for an equipment that has equip 2. And whenever equipped creature attacks, defending player reveals cards from the top of his or her library until he or she reveals a land. Yep, it's that mill effect again. And this creature gets +1/+0 until the end of the turn for each card revealed this way. And that player puts the revealed cards into his or her graveyard. Yes, this equipment is the perfect synergy for the Haunt of Hightower. If you don't have Trepanation Blade in your Haunt of Hightower deck, get out of town. You need to stop playing Haunt of Hightower, because this is the card that goes with Haunt of Hightower 100%. I mean, he's already going to get +1/+1 counter for each of those cards, and then now he's going to be getting an additional +1/+0 for each of the cards. Man, super busted. Alright. Next we have some draw card spells for Phyrexian Arena. 2 black and 1 for an enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep you draw a card and you lose 1 life. It sounds like it's painful and it's bad, but honestly, you got 40 life. I mean, if it ends up drawing you 39 cards and then killing you, I mean, you'll probably have a way to gain life and gain that life back. That's never happened. But, Phyrexian Arena has killed people before, but that's because they took a lot of combat damage. I mean, Phyrexian Arena by itself is not going to kill you, especially in Commander. Same with Necropotence. So, Necropotence is 3 black, and it says, skip your draw step. Bad, right? Whenever you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. Also bad. But the good thing is you pay 1 life, and you exile the top card of your library face down, and you put that card into your hand at the beginning of your next end step. So you can do this as many times as you want. So you could pay 10 life and draw 10 cards at the beginning of your next end step. You do still have to discard, and whatever you discard, you got to exile. But, drawing 10 cards, pretty much guarantees you're going to get the cards you need. Next we have Necrologia, 3 generic and 2 black for an instant. You can cast Necrologia only during your end step. As an additional cost to cast Necrologia, you pay X life, and you draw X cards. Yeah, you may have noticed we have lots of ways to gain life in this deck, so drawing X cards and paying X life is huge for us. I mean, I've used this to draw 20 cards before. I've used this to draw so many cards. Fabulous card. Test it out in your deck. You'll be satisfied. Next we have our ramp. So we got Bantu's Monument, 3 generic for a legendary artifact. Black creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast a creature spell, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. Jet Medallion's an artifact that says black spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. We got Soul Ring. Next we have Thran Dynamo, 4 generic for an artifact that taps to add 3 mana to your mana pool. Sweet, goes in almost every commander deck. Next we have Sword of the Animist, 2 generic for a legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, don't forget that, I always do. Whenever equipped creature attacks, you may search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. Yeah, this can get you a land like every single turn. Definitely one of the more powerful mono rocks in the whole game, actually. And next we have Extraplanar Lens. Yeah, strange, right? Well, it's 3 generic for an artifact that has imprint. When Extraplanar Lens comes into play, you may remove target land you control from the game. The removed card is imprinted on this artifact. Whenever a land with the same name as the imprinted card is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana to his or her mana pool of any type that land produced. So what that means is we exile a swamp underneath this, and then whenever any player taps a swamp, that player is going to be doubling their mana with the swamp. They're going to be adding 2 black mana with the swamp. But we are actually running snow-covered swamps. Ha 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 ha, yes, that's the trick. So because we're going to be exiling a snow-covered swamp, only we are going to be able to double our mana with extraplanar lens. Pretty sweet, nifty trick. I recommend you do this for any monocolored deck in Modern or Commander or Legacy. If you're playing a monocolored deck, there's no reason not to run snow-covered lands and run an extraplanar lens and a scrying sheets. So that brings us into our lands. So we have 26 snow-covered swamps. We have a scrying sheets, which says it's a snow land, and you can tap it to add 1 mana to your mana pool. Or you can pay 1 and a snow, which has to be from a snow land. So you pay 1 and a snow, and you tap it to look at the top card of your library. If that card is snow, you may reveal it and put it into your hands. In other words, if that card is one of our basic snow-covered swamps, we get to reveal it and put it into our hand. Great little thing to do with some extra mana. A great way, again, for a monocolored deck to ramp, alright? Another little synergy you can throw into any monocolored deck. You make all of your lands snow lands, and you throw in scrying sheets, and you just look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, you get to put it into your hand. Sweet. Next we have a couple cycling lands. Barren Moor. It enters tapped, it adds a black mana to your mana pool, or you could cycle it for 1 black. You know, if you just are mana flooded and you don't need that land, the cycling lands are fabulous. I've had so many situations where I drew a cycling land and I didn't need it, so I just cycle it away and I draw another card. It's great. Next we have Desert of the Glorified. It enters taps, it adds a black mana to your mana pool, or you can cycle it for 1 and a black. We have Bajuka Bog, which goes in every black deck ever. If you don't have it, buy it now. They're not expensive. It enters taps, it adds a black mana to your mana pool, and when it enters the battlefield, exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Next we have Temple of the False God. It taps to add 2 mana to your mana pool. Activate this ability only if you control 5 or more lands. Yeah, I mean, this is Commander here. We're playing a late game format. You are eventually going to get 5 lands. I've never regretted having this card. Of course, if it's, you know, one of the only 2 lands in your opening hand, you know, okay. But most of the time, Temple of the False God, it works, man. I've never had it be a dead card. All right, next we have Cabal Coffers. It's a land, and you can pay 2 and tap it to add 1 black mana to your mana pool for each swamp you control. Yeah, nice ramp there. Next we have Ark of Erazka, which is a land with Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get the city's blessing for the rest of the game. It taps to add a colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can pay 5 and tap it to draw a card, and you activate this ability only if you have the city's blessing. And next we have Reliquary Tower. You have no maximum hand size, which is exactly what we need if we're running Necropotence or Necrologia. We need to have no maximum hand size, so we don't need to discard, right? Alright, next we have Ghost Quarter, which says it adds a colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can tap it and sacrifice it to destroy target land. Its controller may search their library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle their library. So this is for, you know, getting rid of their pesky utility lands. Next we have Wasteland, same thing, taps to add a colorless mana to your mana pool. You tap and sacrifice Wasteland and destroy target non-basic land. And lastly, we have our land that doesn't add mana to our mana pool. So really, we only have actually 36 lands in our deck that add mana to our mana pool, because Glacial Chasm doesn't add mana. What Glacial Chasm does is it has a cumulative upkeep of 2 life. So after you play this card, the next turn you're going to have to pay 2 life or sacrifice it. The turn after that, on your upkeep, you're going to have to pay 4 life or sacrifice it. On your upkeep after that, you're going to have to pay 6 life and sacrifice it. So, yeah, that's bad. When it enters the battlefield, you have to sacrifice a land. That's bad. Creatures you control can't attack. That is also bad. Alright, here's the good thing. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. All damage. Now think about this. In a 3-player game, all that damage that's going to be prevented is almost guaranteed going to be more damage than you're going to be taking from paying the life from the cumulative upkeep, right? I mean, yeah, you're going to be taking 2, you're going to be taking 4, you're going to be taking 6. If all 3 people are ganged up on you, you're going to be taking 10, you're going to be taking 20, you're going to be taking 30. All right, so Glacial Chasm, I throw this in literally every single deck that I'm worried about receiving hate. You know, if people are going to gang up on you, if your playgroup gangs up on you, put Glacial Chasm into your deck. Alright, so that is it. That is the Haunt of Hightower. That's my deck tip. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button, that subscribe button. My goal is to get 100 subscribers by July 12th, 2019. That's my birthday. So help me reach that goal. I hope you're having a wonderful day and happy holidays. Until next time, take care, take it easy.